Hi, everybody. I'm John McLaughlin with the Iowa Firearms Coalition. Welcome once again to another Warrior Wednesday. And folks, this is probably the most important presentation we've ever had. Joining us tonight is Ed Monk. Ed is former military, former law enforcement, and to add all to that, he was also a teacher, I think history teacher for 4 years. So he brings a wealth of experience to the current situation we're facing in this country, and that is the active killer. Of course, the name's Iowa. A short time ago, we had a double murder suicide on a church campus, and we're really hyper-focused on what we can do to not only stop the threat before it gets to either our houses of worship or our schools, but once it happens, how to mitigate the loss of life. And that's where Ed comes in with a wealth of research. And Ed, let's just cut through the emotions tonight, and let's get to the heart of the facts of what can we do to mitigate the threat once that killer gets onto the school ground or worst case into the school.
Well, it's very simple. It's the sooner we stop him, the fewer victims we'll have. And I think everybody would want the lowest number of victims. So it's just simple math. The shooter's going to have a shooting rate, which I find to be about one victim every 10 seconds. But that's an average overall shooter. So there's some that are more aggressive, some that are not. But even for a shooter, he's not consistent over his attack. So an average that I find is about a 5-minute length of time for an attack from first shot to last. So even though his rate, like Parkland, was 9.8, every 9.8 seconds he shot somebody. But in the first minute, he shot 14. So he more than doubled the average. So it just makes sense. They're going to start in a place that's very crowded. So they're going to shoot people much more rapidly in the first minute of their attack than in the last minute of their attack when it's harder for them to find them. So it's even more important that we stop them early. And from what I can see, if the person that's going to stop him is present, and my definition of that means the person that's going to stop him can hear or see his first shot. Not they're somewhere in the building, somewhere on the property, but they can hear or see the first shot. If that person has a gun and aggressively attacks the shooter to stop him, we have 1 to 9 or 0 to 9 victims. We have single-digit victims 17 out of 19 times. That's 89%. So I'm going to push a solution that has an 89% success rate until somebody shows me a plan that has a 90% or better. It's just very simple. It's like if your house started to burn, the quicker you put out the fire, the less damage you would have.
100%.
The quicker you stop an active shooter, the lower victims you'll have, and the fewer people will be shot. But because you end it quickly, you can get EMS in quicker, and those few that you let him shoot before you stop him have a better chance of survival because of medical care getting to him quicker.
Absolutely, and we're huge proponents of teaching Stop the Bleed, having trauma kits in school, knowing the TCCC protocol, all that stuff we've talked about here in Iowa, and just trying to push that across the country as much as we can. So obviously there's resistance from school administrators. They're afraid of teachers having firearms. My own experience, and you have way more than I do in teaching teacher-specific courses, but I find people that may have a low level of experience, but they are willing. And I'd rather take someone who is willing to charge in on their worst day, and I can train them how to do the firearm stuff, than find someone that maybe has some experience with guns, but doesn't really have the heart to do what's required when the moment chooses them, you might say.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not political, it's not emotional. It's just from looking at what's happened and using simple math. What matters are 3 things. Are you there? Are you willing? And are you armed? Those 3 things. And well, you don't have the advanced training of a law enforcement officer, they would say. And well, the Parkland school resource officer had over 30 years of law enforcement training, and it didn't do any good because he didn't go in. And the next 7 deputies that showed up also didn't go in. So that's got to be over 100 years of law enforcement training there, somewhere within a half a mile of that building, but none of them went in.
Right.
So, yeah, and the people that are in the building, and I say that because most of them happen at least some point in the building, the people that are in there, the potential victims, the ones that are getting shot at, have a lot more to lose. So they have a lot more skin in the game, a lot more motivation to stop it versus somebody who's outside the building who has to have a lot of heart to go in, especially if they don't know anybody in the building.
Right. And certainly there are SRO, school resource officers, that have that. And I will say maybe historically the schools have been a place where some of the departments send the guy that's maybe getting a little older, a little slower, maybe not quite as sharp, and they retire him to be an SRO. Is that a model you've seen, and what can we do about that?
Well, I've seen both of those, but I think now the SROs are valuable. And what we can't measure is how many times did someone consider attacking a school and go, you know what, I'm not, because they got a cop. There's no way to measure that.
Yep.
But I've spoken to a lot of schools, and many times they'll say, well, hey, we love to have you. We're interested to hear what you have to say, but we have an SRO, so we're safe. And it's like, no, you're not. There is some deterrent factor there, but I can show you a list of 10 schools that had an SRO. The SRO was on campus. The attacker was a student or a pair of students from that school. So they knew the SRO was there and they attacked anyway. So it's not 100% deterrent. And I can show you 3 schools that, even though they had a resource officer on campus, in one case, Santa Fe, 2 resource officers on campus, not only were they attacked, but they got double-digit high victim numbers. So the SRO, I'm not saying they're not valuable at all, but I'm saying they're not a guaranteed deterrent, and they're not a guarantee of a low victim count. The problem is math and time. Right. Whether you're a cop or you're an armed school employee, like high schools, the most common, most likely place they're going to attack a high school, it's going to be a student, and it's going to be in the cafeteria before school or the cafeteria during lunch. The second most likely is in the front office foyer area. In the high school where I'm at, and many high schools I've been in, if I'm in the cafeteria, I won't hear a shooting that starts in the front office. Right. If I'm in the front office, I won't hear a shooting that starts in the cafeteria. So even if the policeman is somewhere on campus, if they're not close enough to hear it or see it, they won't get there quickly. The reason someone happened to hear it or see it is magic in this math is, if the person that's going to stop it can hear or see the first shot, we eliminate the need for a 911 call, which is 1 to 4 minutes. And then the radio call to the cops because of the 911 call, and then the police travel time, and then the police entry. All that takes a lot of time, several minutes, and all that time people are getting shot. If the person that's there that hears it or see it, they can stop it in the first 30 seconds, and our numbers can be low. But that is also the same for schools. I've trained a lot of schools. Some of the schools I've trained, they have armed staff, but it's a good old boy network. It's the 6 guys up in the administration building that are armed, nobody in the cafeteria, nobody in the school front offices, nobody on the playgrounds of the elementaries. So it's just not enough having somebody there with a gun. There has to be enough of them, and they have to be geographically spaced, understanding the enemy and where it's most likely to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the training I've done, I find like the shop teachers, the coaches, they're kind of the gung-ho people. Yeah, I'll do this. But they may be back in the shop running a table saw and will never hear the shots that are fired down the hall. So what is the optimum number, like per floor, or, you got classes that are divided in different wings of buildings? Kind of what have you found, and how many do we need? And to give us that backup for sickness or vacation, things like that.
Yeah, you always want redundancy. So if you're a high school, definitely anytime there's kids in the cafeteria, that would be during any lunch period. But many schools like mine require students to be in the cafeteria if they arrived at school before first bell, because they don't want kids wandering around getting in trouble. They hoard them into the cafeteria. Now, while that's, most schools have 2, 3, or sometimes 4 lunch periods. So all their student body is split up into thirds or fourths while they're eating lunch. But if they make everybody go in the cafeteria before first bell, now there's more in there before first bell than there is during the lunch period. So they're just crammed in there like cattle, and they're not guarded. So anytime there's kids in the cafeteria, you have to have preferably 2, at least 2 planning on being there. Same thing if you have a group in the media center, you have a group in the gym. And then as far as the classrooms, generally what I tell them is a good plan is to have 2 on every wing of every floor. Okay. And it's 2 because if you and I are on the second floor east wing, and you and I are the 2 armed staff members, if you have a sick day, if you took your kids on a field trip today, or if you went downstairs to photocopy some things in the office, if for whatever reason one of us isn't there, at least one of us is that can respond. So and then of course always in the front office. Now, if you're an elementary, the elementary has the additional problem of the playground that the other schools don't have. So in an elementary, the shootings don't start in the classroom. or in the cafeteria, because it's not one of your own students doing the shooting, like in the middle and the high schools. So it's going to start in the entry as the outsider gains entry into your building, or they're going to shoot your kids on the playground, which has happened 3 times. Yep. So with an elementary, you have to have the entries guarded, and anytime the kids are on the playground, you have to have somebody out there, because they are absolute sitting ducks. And no elementary I have ever worked with has armed presence on the playground when the kids are there. So they're just, even though we've had 3 cases of that, we're not learning the lesson, and we're sitting ducks.
Well, with the church security world that I live in now, it's all about that, concentric rings of security. We want to stop the person before they even get out of their car and into the church campus at all. And we had an event recently where a guy, came on campus, 3 knives, alcohol, and it's like we got him stopped before he got close to any, the nursery area or kids' playgrounds or stuff like that. So what you're saying makes perfect sense. Let's get people out there watching for what doesn't belong when the kids are out playing a recess or practicing sports or anything like that.
Yeah, and when I'm at the schools, I'm a part-time police officer here. I'm not an SRO, but I sub as an SRO from time to time when we have a shortage. If I'm at the high school or middle school, say before school, when kids are coming in, for this threat, I'm looking at them, because they're going to be the shooter. It's a middle or a high school, almost always it's one of your own students. Mm-hmm. When I'm out in front of the school at elementary, as the kids are coming in, getting out of their parents' car, getting off the bus, I'm looking beyond them, because the shooter in elementary school has never been a student, never been a parent, never been a faculty member. It is an outsider. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for different things depending on where I am. And with churches, most of the big ones start in the parking lot. So churches absolutely have to have a presence in the parking lot to identify and hopefully stop him in the parking lot. If you can do that, your number's almost guaranteed to be low. If you let him get in the building, it's a more complex problem.
So let me throw something else at you again, see how it applies to the schools. With the guys on my team at the churches, I know kind of what all their capability is. And I know my guy who's the jiu-jitsu guy, the guy that's the de-escalation guy, and I know the guys that can shoot. And so, for instance, from the back of the church where we stand to the front of the stage, it's 27 yards. I need guys that can make that shot. Not everybody can do that. So we made the qualification so tough that if you can't do a 25-yard shot, if you miss even one, you go back for remedial training. Obviously, we're going to get a bunch of different skill levels with folks that may just have a concealed carry permit. So how do we get them to a place where they feel comfortable with the shots they may need to take, or kind of what does your training do to bring them up to I guess, minimum acceptable standard?
Well, I do a 1, 2, and 3 day active shooter response class, and I do a 2-day active shooter instructor class. So here's what I tell them. I don't set a minimum standard. What I say is everybody has to know your maximum distance, which you get 100% hits, not a hit, not most hits, but what is your max distance you can guarantee 100% hits under a little bit of stress. We always want to improve that, but you got to know with your current gun and your current skill level what you can do. So say a church team, and if it's a team of people, if it's not an open enrollment class, if it is a group of SROs or a church team, then the team leader also needs to know that. So for instance, you and I are on a church team that's training, and God love me, I just can't get consistent hits past 10. 10 yards and in, I'm good. You're getting consistent hits back to 20. Okay. Then what that tells us on our team is I'm not the parking lot guy. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. I need you put your weaker person in a place that has the chance for the closest shot. In a school, that would probably be the cafeteria. You don't want your weakest skilled people to be in the cafeteria. And I really stress 100% hits, because, what we say is we talk rule 4, but we don't train rule 4.
Right.
Safety rule 4, be sure of your target and what's beyond. We say that, we preach that, everybody shakes their head up and down, we memorize it, and then we go out to a sterile range where we don't let anybody out in front of you, and we give you a target that you're absolutely certain of with a big dirt wall behind it, and we don't train rule 4. So on the range, misses are only a little embarrassing. They don't ruin lives. So we've got to stress 100% hits. And we do that in our training in the 3-dimensional scenarios with 3-dimensional mannequins that we use. We can put non-threats in front of and behind to make them understand, not only memorize rule 4, but apply it as well.
So what you're saying makes perfect sense with time and the potential body count. And I mean, you just can't deny that the math is there. So what kind of luck have you had breaking down, not everybody is in the gun world, right? We got people that love kids and love to teach. how do we move them to this recognition that, okay, we understand this is something you might be uncomfortable with, but here are the facts. And if we're going to mitigate this threat or keep the numbers very low, this is really the only way to do it.
Well, and that's kind of what I do. I just show them the numbers. But the problem is, if we get a group, whether it's church people or school people, and we get them together because they live in Houston, and we say, let's talk about what we're going to do to protect our people, our students, our flock against hurricanes, because we live on the coast. They would talk rationally. They might disagree, but they would talk reasonably and rationally.
Right.
Same thing if we talked about here in Arkansas, tornadoes.
Absolutely.
Or if we lived in California, earthquakes. Might disagree, but we would use reason and logic and facts. If you throw a gun on the table, people lose most of their ability to reason at all. They just have knee-jerk responses. They go political, they go emotional, and they don't have a solution. All they have is reasons why we shouldn't use your solution. So I show them the math. I show them that has an 89% success rate. Nothing's a guarantee. And they're like, oh no, we can't do that because. So, for instance, in Parkland, we had 34 people shot. Well, if we had armed staff, this could happen. Well, it could, but it never has. And would it be worse than 34? Because that's what Parkland had before the guy voluntarily left. So it's all about risk and choosing the best risk for you. But they absolutely, and I got to admit, a lot of they're using math too. What are the odds?
Right.
What are the odds? I have driven intentionally without my seatbelt on occasion.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what would happen if the dice rolled against me and a drunk driver slammed into me, right? But I took the risk because what are the odds? And that's, how long are you going to be a superintendent? How long are you going to be a principal?
Right.
Honestly, what are the odds of him coming here? So the odds are he's almost guaranteed not to, but man, if the dice rolls against you and he does, it's going to be catastrophic, and not for you. Your career will be hurt, but it's the kids and the staff that you're responsible for. So a lot of times when I show these numbers at schools, if I'm talking to the whole school, like teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and usually the principals and the superintendents are on the back somewhere, as I'm presenting them, they'll look back at their
Right.
principal and superintendent and say, well, he's right. We're sitting ducks. If he decides to come here, if the shooter shows up tomorrow, it's going to be a slaughter. Why aren't we doing something? We're doing the same thing that Parkland did. We're doing the same thing that Columbine did. We're doing the same thing that Santa Fe did. And the high numbers they got. So why are we still doing the same plan that has failed those other schools? Because it probably won't come.
If you look at any other industry, for instance, I'm deeply involved in aviation as a designated pilot examiner. If we don't test people continually on the worst possible scenarios, it's low probability but high risk. You may have hundreds of people behind you and you're in charge of this aircraft, and now you've got hydraulics failures or fires or whatever. If you don't train for that, you're never going to be able to handle the real event, and you would never consider a career of flying bodies in an airplane without having trained for that worst scenario. Why is it that the schools just can't look at the other industry and say, you know what, it is a low probability, but why not be prepared just in case?
Because it's political and it's controversial. And so listen, this lockdown drill has been in the books for over 20 years. It was here before I got here. And I had one principal say, Ed, I hear you, but we've had this plan for over 20 years and it's worked great for us. No problems at all with it. Well, of course, because the active shooter didn't show up.
Right.
And not knowing the emergency drills, the emergency actions to take when an engine goes out on a plane. You don't need to know that stuff until you do, until an engine.
Yeah.
So a problem we have is people are making plans for the days the shooter doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm. And
it's very simple. Nobody wants a gun in the school on all those days, but everybody will want guns in the school on the day he shows up. The problem is you'll have to call up a 911, and that's going to take some time, and time equals a lot of dead bodies. I can't explain it with this. Again, with anything else, they would talk about fire. They would talk logically about what we can do to prevent loss of life if we should have a fire, but they won't with guns. And I call it the boogeyman. I've got a set of slides that I cover because I know what they're going to say. They got a list of things of why we can't arm the staff, even though that has an 89% if done right, that model has an 89% success rate. So they have a reason why they don't want to do that. So since they're not going to do that, they're going to stick with what's our country's done for over 35 years that has gotten 30 and 40 people shot. It makes absolutely no sense.
I mean, I have extended family members that are deeply involved as school principals and assistant principals, and they're sending me this stuff like how to use a chair to barricade the door and things like that. And you got a glass window in your door. Even if your door is locked, if he can see the kids, he's going to be shooting through the window. It's just they can't bring their mind to think about those kind of things. And, we've all been through Alice training for churches and such. People get ingrained in their mind. It's run, hide, fight. That's a list of possibilities. It's not an order of operation. So in some of the training we've done, we've mixed it up. Here, let me show you how you can, when the door goes open, the bad guy's eyes are going to go into the room. And if you're over here, he hasn't looked for you, and there's your chance to counterattack. It's like, nobody seems to be teaching that, but I caught some of that in your presentations. You're mixing things up, and sometimes even unarmed fighting is a good way to go.
Yeah. I mean, stopping him quickly is the best for humanity. Fewer people will be shot. So fighting with a gun sure is a lot more successful. I can show you a list. In fact, I show presentations all the time where I show examples of very brave people going up against armed active shooters without a gun and successfully stopping them. They just did it in a church out in California a couple weeks ago. Right. But I also got a list of people that tried that and didn't, because the gun is just a superior weapon and it can be used at a distance. And that's why he's bringing it to do his evil. And that's another thing is, when I first started doing this, I would say I did 24 years active duty in the military, including a trip to Iraq, but really none of that applies here because it didn't have to do with active shooters. But it really does. I mean, I never shot an active shooter in the military. They never trained me to fight an active shooter in the military. But what the military trains combat arms officers to do, infantry, armor, the fighters, they train the officers to look at a threat or a potential threat and define it. What are its capabilities? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? What are its tactics, techniques, procedures, and equipment? What is it most likely to do? What is its most likely courses of action? And what is the environment in which we expect to fight him? Once that's defined, then we make an operational plan that we think is best to defeat that enemy that we just defined. And then we build a training plan to train our operators how to execute that operational plan to defeat that enemy. And that's the exact methodology here. And the other thing it took me way too long to realize as I was talking to organizations is what was absolutely second nature, without a thought in the military, is repulsive to non-military, like schools, like casualty estimation. If we're going to do combat operations, we do, given what we know, this is what we can expect for casualties. We do the best we can to predict them, because then we say, is that a too high of a rate or not? If it's too high, then we change the plan. We get more people, we get more air support. We do something to change the math. And then when it's acceptable, then we still have to plan for where are our casualty evacuation centers, where are our hospitals, how many evacuation vehicles do we have? So it's just second nature to military. It took me too long to realize with schools that the commander would look at the staff officer and say, okay, given this plan we've just briefed, what's our casualty estimation? Right. If I ask a superintendent, what's the maximum number of shot victims you're willing to have if a shooter comes here? They look at me like I'm a terrorist. Like, no, we don't talk about that kind of stuff. Well, that's what leaders do. And I know it's not easy, but that's what leaders do. And what I find is leaders of most schools, meaning school principal and the superintendents, they're forfeiting this fight. They don't think they're responsible for the safety of their kids. I was at the National School Safety Conference June in New Orleans, and there was a panel of superintendents up there at one point talking, and one superintendent outright said, listen, it is not our responsibility to stop the active shooter. That's why we have law enforcement. And it's that exact thinking that's why we keep getting 20, 30, and 40 kids shot whenever they show up, because you're saying those people are responsible. And even if you have a resource officer, active shooters are just a subset of violent criminals. And most violent criminals go out of their way not to start their violent attack right in front of a uniformed cop. So yeah, the cop may have been in the parking lot on the next floor. So it's still going to have that delay of a radio and or a phone call and travel time, whether that's a patrol cop driving or the SRO running across campus to get to the building, like they did in Parkland, like they did in Santa Fe. So it's maddening to me. It's so simple because the military doesn't take in politics. It's what ends the fight the quickest with the least amount of casualties. That's what the military plans for. Yep. And when you try to coax businesses, schools, and churches into that, there's just so much resistance. Because listen, we've already got the lockdown drill. Right. The military and schools have something in common. Neither one of them likes independent thought.
Yeah.
They like everybody to do the same thing. So schools love lockdown drills. Again, we're having plans based off of all the days the shooter doesn't show up. Well, on the days the shooter doesn't show up, lockdown plans are great because they're easy to type and they're easy to drill. Lockdown drill, lockdown drill. The principal in charge of security walks around with a clipboard and says, yep, everybody did those things they're supposed to do. We had another successful active shooter drill, send that up to state so they can check the block. Well, what happened in Parkland? He goes into the first floor and he shoots 24 people on the first floor. 18 of those 24 were inside of their classrooms behind locked doors, that illusion of security. If we just get behind a door and lock it, the boogeyman can hurt us.
Yep.
Right? But he shot through the door. So if your doors aren't bulletproof and your locks aren't bulletproof and your walls aren't bulletproof, which they were not at Sandy or at Parkland, then the lockdown drill only locks you in a barrel to be shot in. And that's what we saw there. All right, well, let's get $1 million grant from the federal government and let's make every classroom like a prison, and we make it bulletproof steel with absolutely doors you can't penetrate. Well, now what if he starts his shooting inside that classroom? Now how are cops and EMS going to get it?
Yep.
So everything's a double-edged sword, and people don't, they want a magic pill. They want a magic pill. Metal detectors. Well, Red Lake High School, the guy walked in and shot the guard. The metal detector walked right by it. Didn't work. Oh, crap. Well, just show us something we can write a check for and make this problem go away. And man, there are a lot of vendors. There are a lot of companies out there selling a lot of stuff that they're promising this will make your kids safe, and it won't. Well, let's lock the doors. Okay. Sandy Hook, he shot through the glass. Arapahoe, he showed up with a shotgun, intentionally had a slug as the first round to shoot through the lock on the door. These are thinking evil enemies. They're not just dummies that'll come up to the door, rattle the knob and go, oh crap, they locked it, and turn around and go give themselves up to the police. And that we're not planning against an evil thinking enemy, because that's what keeps showing up. And that's why we have a high victim count.
Absolutely. And you take your presentation, all the facts and research you've done, presented across the country. So for those of us that want more information, I know you're in July coming to the Faith-Based Security Network Conference with Carl Chin, who's a good friend of mine. How can folks find maybe some other locations you're going to be presenting at to get more of this data? I know you do out to like 2 to 4 hour presentations. Where can they find that?
If they can contact me, my number is 870-273-1113, or my email is my name, Ed Monk, EDMONK at AOL.com. Or my company, Last Resort Firearms Training. We don't have a website, but we have a Facebook page and we update there. But yeah, I actually have 4. That Faith-Based Security Network is the 4th trip that I have in July. Okay. Things are getting really busy. And I do anywhere from 2 hours to 8 hours. I do 8 hours at the Lethal Force Conference every year. And the sad thing is, in 8 hours, you still can't cover half of the active shooter attacks that have occurred. We have too many. Yeah. And again, I can do presentations, just presentations. I can do presentations with live fire, or again, a lot of schools just aren't going to go the arm route, or in some cases that they cannot legally. There's still things we can do, I think, to lower the victim count. Not as much as if we had a good armed presence, but we can lower the victim count by doing the presentation and educating the staff and students, but also going through exercises with them so that they know their 3 options of fight, flee, barricade. And they know, again, everybody doesn't do the same thing. They have the option. Everybody has the option to choose one of those 3 options that's the best for them, given where they are in relation to where the shooter is.
Well, I just highly encourage all of our listeners for the Iowa Firearms Coalition to share this presentation, get it to your school folks, get it to your church folks, get it to Governor Reynolds, get it to everybody. And let's start hardening the schools mentally. Let's get them focused in on doing the right thing, arming teachers that are willing and able, the SROs, the whole program, because as you've seen from research going all the way back to the UT clock tower shooting in the 60s, we haven't made much progress with all the things that have been tried. Let's get to what actually shows an 80%, 90% success rate or higher. Ed, thank you very much for, I know you have a busy schedule, for joining us and giving us some of this research and encouraging us to dig deeper and to find the right path to cut down on these innocent kids being harmed.
Oh, thanks for having me on. If I can help you in any way, please let me know.
I will. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the evening.
You too.